The year of 1992 was the year of my birth. However, another very important event happened in 1992 that helped shape the future of the internet and the way we use it today. In 1992, Mark Andreessen did go ahead and with his team, they started to work on a special web browser, the Mosaic web browser, which was drastically different than previous web browsers. Mark Andreessen's work and the work of his team in developing the Mosaic web browser changed how the internet was viewed and seen at the time. It greatly increased the amount of people using the internet and made it easier to use for everyone involved, helping shape the internet that we see and use today with our current day web browsers. Now, to understand why the Mosaic web browser was such a big deal, why it had all these effects, the first thing you've got to do is really see the web browser itself. Just as an example page is what the web browser would look like in use, you can already see it looks a lot similar to the web browsers that we use today. There's the menu bar up there, there's the address bar, and there's the actual content of the page itself. Now, the Mosaic web browser, one of its big differences from its competitors at the time is it had a graphical user interface like this. You know, the actual page itself, where they coded for it, they were able to easily code multiple pictures into it and be able to fluidly transition between them throughout the page when you would go through the page. Instead of having to load each picture individually, you look at it, they were just all right there on the page as you went through the content. Very similar to how web browsers are today. Now, the web browser itself, with that difference in the way it was developed and laid out, it made it much easier for people to pick up and use the internet. I mean, they could just load the web browser, they needed barely any training to use it because it was all visual and picture based. So it was really easy to understand. The actual use of the web browser, it did increase the amount of people using the internet at the time. The development started in 1992, but it was released in 1993. And from its release in 1993 to 1996, the amount of people using the internet jumped to about 45 million internet users in that year, individual users. Now that's a pretty large amount of users already, and I've got one of these little items in here just representing 1 million users. Now from 1996 to 1999, the 45 million made a pretty large jump up to 175 million. In just about 3 years, there was that many more people using the internet. Just with the way that the changes from the Mosaic web browser caused on it, it made it easy for just about anyone to pick up the internet and start using it. Now, out of those 175 million, most of them were in the US, of course, but that's still a very large amount of people. Now, after the development of the Mosaic web browser and its release and its widespread success, Mark, he decided that there was a very large commercial opportunity available to him, where him and his team, they went to go found the Netscape corporations because of this very large option available to them. So after they developed the Mosaic browser, they went ahead and started working on the Netscape browser, which some of you might be familiar with. It was very popular from its release in 1995 all the way up to 2004. The Netscape browser was one of the most used browsers, and at the time nothing could really compete with Internet Explorer since it came on Windows devices. Just by default, you know, everyone had Internet Explorer. But the other browsers like the Netscape one, you had to go manually download. And it was a very strong browser, lasting all the way to 2004 in usage. But shortly after they developed the Netscape browser and released it, Mark and his team, they started working on another browser, which some of you might be a little bit more familiar with, the Firefox browser, because they did develop a suite of internet usage and protocols before they developed it, but then they made a standalone browser for Firefox. Now, when they released Firefox, up until that point, no web browsers had really even been able to compete with Internet Explorer. The web browser, you know, Internet Explorer was just #1. But when Firefox released, it took a huge chunk of Internet Explorer users. It was the first browser that was able to actually compete with Internet Explorer, and their market shares took a very huge hit. Now, after the release of Firefox, up until about, well, even today right now, the Firefox browser makes between 19 and 16% of the total internet usage. You just use the Firefox browser. And 16% doesn't sound that much, but with as many internet users as there are, that is a gigantic number. Now, after the release of that, you know, Mark Andreessen's contributions to internet development, specifically with the browsers and the way you navigate the internet, it's made a huge difference in the way it's developed for. And basically every browser almost, almost looks like part of what the original browser they worked on looks like. I mean, it made the internet quick, easy, and accessible for just about anyone who wanted to use it, opening up to just about everyone. And that led to a lot of changes on the internet and different things you could do from the internet, like running businesses.